Alright, in this video we are going to look at taking our image, our project now that has been blocked out. We have all these shapes made with fill colors on them and converting them into more like a finished project kind of thing where we've incorporated gradients into all our shapes as opposed to using fill colors. So again, looking back at some of the samples just to get you an idea kind of what we're going for, you see how the atmospheric perspective has been added to these. So if we're looking at this, you notice things that are further away have less color, they're kind of more gray. They have less detail, and they also have less contrast between the shapes that are far away. So if this mountain, for example, had snow on it, it would be kind of tougher to see. You would see it, but it wouldn't be like white with a black mountain. The contrast between those two colors is much less because they're so far away, and we're kind of seeing through all these particles that are in the air. Other thing to notice on these couple samples here is the detail. Up close we have more detail. Like if we look at this tree here, you can see it has a couple different pieces to it. However, when we look over here, they're just like kind of like triangular prisms, and then by the time you get back in here, now all of a sudden they're just silhouettes, and then by the time you get back here, you just don't even see the trees anymore. So it's like less detail the further back we go. So that's something, as you blocked out, you may have done some of that, but as you start making decisions with these gradients and kind of seeing the project come together, you might kind of change your mind as far as what you have on there. So back to the project. As far as how I did this, first thing to know, the eyedropper is your friend. The way that I put mine together, my project, is I was blocking it out. In one layer I have all the shapes that I made. In the other layer I have the initial image along with the guidelines. So again, those guys I had turned off. So here's my initial image. This shape, let's say we were working on this one. What I can do is, or actually let's just pick a different one. Let's go with this guy. What I can do, if I wanted to color this thing in, let's say I just had this as a solid fill color right now and I was trying to get the gradient, what I did was I turned off to get everything out of my way. I'm going to need my swatches to execute this next step. What I can do is, now that I don't have anything selected on my screen, I can use the eyedropper and I can pick a couple spots on here. And once I pick a spot with the fill color, I can drag the fill here. So I eyedropped, I'm going to go back to my eyedropper again. I'm going to hold my mouse down and I'm looking at the fill color in the toolbar as I go, and I'm picking colors that I think might work well for my gradients. I'm kind of throwing them in there. So now once I turn this back on and I take this one, oops, that was a solid fill color, select it, and if I want, once I make it a gradient, if I want to apply these swatches as my colors in here, I simply drag the swatch to whichever area I want that color to be. When I drop it in place, it changes it to that color. So let's go with a color that's much different so you can see this changing. So you can kind of see how that works. I can use colors from the project then to color in mine. Now, as I was showing you in those examples, though, we are going to kind of exaggerate that atmospheric perspective a little bit if we need to. So you may then have to go back and say on these shapes that are further away, I might have went in here and lowered the saturation a little bit to make it look like it's further away. I can also kind of play with the hue, the brightness, all that. So I can change these colors a little bit to kind of get what I'm going for. Remember, the colors don't have to be the exact thing that was there before. So that is kind of how you'll put your gradients in. So all of these things that I made, if you notice, they're all gradients. Some are linear, some are radial. Some things that you would expect to be linear are actually radial gradients, like what I did for this one. I made one giant circle so that this corner would be the darkest spot. Over here is still somewhat dark, and then the lightest area in here is just kind of how I wanted that one to look. Looking at the original and kind of thinking about that atmospheric perspective where the further away I get, kind of the more color fades away to gray. A lot of the little things in here are gradients as well that you may not realize, like the lids for the railway cars. They are, I want to show that they're kind of rounded, and I feel like I get that effect with that. I'd still need to do kind of more work on the train engine here. The smoke is gradients. And if I zoom in on that, you can kind of get a better feel for this. The way this works, they are gradients that fade from a color, meaning like grayish, whitish, to clear. So if I move one of these, it'll be a little easier to see. So that's what my smoke is made out of, is just a bunch of those kind of stacked on top of each other with some shapes in the background. So that is pretty well how you do your gradients. One other thing to consider, you could copy a shape. So say I took this entire shape here and copy it. Then I could paste it in front of itself. And I could make a gradient like I did here, where it fades from a color to clear. When I do that, let's say I want to have like one dark spot. I'm going to make this a radial gradient. And if I wanted to add like a dark spot somewhere, or have just kind of an added color, I can do that now. So if there was supposed to be a dark spot up here on the mountain, I can add an extra little area of color. Because this is fading to clear, I'm still seeing that gradient that's behind here, but now I can add that little feature. So again, you can stack gradients on top of each other. The way that I did that, I made 2 copies of this shape. One has a gradient that's all solid colors. The other has gradients that are fading to clear. I can also drop the opacity down on this second shape so that I get a little less of that effect. So it's just something to play with. If everything else with the gradients is really making sense to you, certainly try stacking 2 shapes on top of each other and messing with those gradients. If that confuses you, that's a part that's kind of like optional in this. You'll still be able to get what you want without doing that. So it's just something to consider. Good luck.